There's definitely a growing trend. We have more semiconductor industry, and it's mainly known like the Silicon Valley of Malaysia. You get to see where the companies are based at and what kind of products do they manufacture.
Hello everyone, welcome to this new video. In today's episode, we're gonna discuss about manufacturing in Malaysia. We are here today in Kuala Lumpur and we're gonna discuss about Malaysia as a place for contract manufacturing or sourcing. So basically, if you are a large SME or an MNC and you are looking at diversifying your supply chain in Asia, Malaysia makes a lot of sense for specific sectors, and I have here today Darshini with me to discuss about those manufacturing aspects. Hi Darshini, thanks for being here today, and can you give us a quick introduction about yourself?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. My name is Darshini. I've got experience working in different sectors before. So I started working in the plastic injection molding for a few years before moving into trade association. So it's the Malaysian Plastic Manufacturer Association. I was there for about a year or so, and before working with the government agency that specializes into promoting the development of the East Coast region. So you have states like the Kelantan, Terengganu, Pahang, and the north of Johor. Before getting this job as a market analyst.
Thanks again, Darshini, for this quick introduction. So as a starting point, maybe, okay, Malaysia is large and there is a lot of clusters. How is basically the geographical aspect on that? Like, is there any part that are more suitable for specific sectors? Can you discuss about that?
Absolutely. So we have different regions throughout Malaysia. So you have the northern region, so which includes Penang and Perlis and Kedah. And then you have the central region, which is Kuala Lumpur, when you have Selangor and Negeri Sembilan. And then you have the East Coast region, so which includes the Kelantan, Terengganu, and Pahang. Moving into southern region, which is Johor Bahru. And you also have the East Malaysia region, which is Sabah and Sarawak. So most of these regions are focusing towards very specialized industry. So for the northern region, we have more semiconductor industry, and it's mainly known like the Silicon Valley for Malaysia. And you also have a medical devices related industry there. And in order to support these two sectors, you also have the automation related industries. In Penang, you have a lot of foreign companies, and one of like the oldest manufacturers there, you have B Brown there. You also have some well-known companies like Intel there, and you also have a local automation company which is called Greatech. It's a public listed company there. And moving into the central region, which is quite a diverse industry being based here. You have more food and beverage related industry. You have even plastic industry here, and including aerospace companies. So you have companies like Tyson, which is a food and beverage company here. They supply to McDonald's. You have Emerson, which is a valve company here. You have also Safran Landing Systems, which is also an aerospace company. Moving into the East Coast region, there are quite a few industrial parks there, and there is also one collective sector. You also have Mercedes-Benz manufacturing plant there, and it's also well known for their rare earth companies being based there, including Lynas. Moving into the southern region, you have quite a number of data center projects there, and you also have furniture companies being based there. In terms of the East Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak, they are quite well known for their agriculture and also for LNG for Petronas.
Okay, thank you, Darshini. Give us a good understanding about where are the clusters located, where are the industrial zones, and then talking about that, is there any free trade zones that somehow the government is pushing more and more manufacturers to go to, and then bringing obviously more FDI. Can you mention some of them?
Absolutely. So there are three main free trade industrial zones. So you have Pasir Gudang, which is in Johor, which is the southern region, and you have the Bayan Lepas, which is in Penang, and you also have Port Klang, which is in the central region. So most of these companies would prefer to be located nearer to these zones or within these zones.
That's great to know. Now, when I reflect and when I see Malaysia on the map compared to Vietnam, then Obviously, there are strengths and weaknesses of those two markets. For instance, more and more low value type of items are pushed out of Malaysia, and you have other countries in the region that are benefiting from that. But you still have this China+1 thing in Malaysia. And I think Malaysia will make a lot of sense in the product categories that you mentioned earlier. It can be high-tech, automation, IoT, all the EMS aspects, so all the assembly line for electronics, and of course the semiconductor trend that is already developed and that may rise in the next year. How do you see the synergies in Malaysia into that, into those maybe low-end type of products that are pushed away for Malaysia to only stay a place for attracting large FDI and pushing up the value chain for manufacturing?
Absolutely. There's definitely a growing trend. Every year we have a very large number of graduates, engineers, and I think for foreign companies to look into Malaysia is one of the country to invest in. We certainly have also skills that local graduates can provide or can be trained, which I believe that, well, our government is actually supporting R&D for companies to actually get them involved into new development into their production.
Okay, so I guess in some specific zone you have some type of CIT exemption, right? If you are into a certain innovation area, you can get incentives to also develop and then do some type of R&D that could somehow support your new venture, right?
Absolutely. So the government actually have a few incentives. So sometimes they provide also grants for certain industry, which is entirely dependent on the government's budget on a yearly basis. But for tax incentives, it's pretty much every year it's being promoted to companies.
So basically, the high-skill labor that you just explained, what about the blue collars? Because obviously, if you want to run a manufacturing plant, you need to have these top engineer levels, all the leadership aspect, okay, but you also need the operators to just operate the different type of machine. And from my observation that I had through the 3 days we went together to factory visits, I've seen a lot of factories saying that they have a kind of 50-50% ratio with 50% of Malaysian nationals and imported labor. You have a couple of nationalities. Very often there are workers from Bangladesh and Nepal as well. So how is basically the regulations here? Because from a factory perspective, they need to provide all the work permit, the visa, but also the accommodation and then the food. So is it something that the government is regulating and enforcing to make sure that you have some type of social stability as well for migrant workers like this?
Absolutely. So the Ministry of Human Resources here in Malaysia, they have their rules and regulations in order to make sure or to ensure foreign workers are being treated well. And they have agencies that actually make sure that they have proper place to stay and their food is being covered and even their transportation is being covered so they can access to the company or place where they're working in a safe manner. And in terms of language-wise, most of them can either speak in English or in Malay, so which makes it still a little bit easier to communicate basic level of information. But in terms of production-wise, companies or basically supervisors still will provide working instruction in their own mother tongue, in Nepalese or in Hindi.
That's great that you are going in that topic of the language. I see mostly in the factory, most of the instructions are everywhere are in English. When you see at the manuals nearby the operators, nearby the machine, everything is in English. While if you go to Vietnam, for instance, everything will be in Vietnamese. So if you are conducting any audits, or even if as a foreigner you want to start to engage and then understand about the QC aspect, about the machinery aspect, the SOPs inside a factory, I feel it's quite easy here to get to know and then to discuss very in-depth with some of the key representative of different sections to leave the factory after with a great understanding about, okay, how the factory is managed. So I feel this is a very plus point for Malaysia if we can compare this to Vietnam. But obviously coming back to the labor, the minus point will obviously be the cost, right? Because companies here, you have all this social environment and of course they need to comply if they want to export to countries like the US or Europe. They need to fulfill all the local regulations and then compliance. So of course in terms of price point, very often the labor cost will be more comparing, I guess, to Thailand, right? Still higher compared to Vietnam. Is it the same understanding that you are having?
It's a bit higher than Vietnam for sure. But I would say that because most of these companies, they are mostly exporting and they would need to ensure that the workers are being paid well and they're being taken care of. Also, due to the regulation by the customer itself, because sometimes the customer, they have unannounced audit, so they would need to be able to provide the justification of how they treat their workers, and they also interview workers in terms of how are they being treated in the company. So the company have to be very transparent of how are they paying the employees.
Looking more as an export perspective, if you are a foreign individual, maybe you are European based or US based, how would you basically approach the market here in terms of the manufacturing aspect? Is there any trade show that people can attend to get to know about some of the key players here? What would be the roadmap and the strategy that you would recommend them to do to get a first understanding about Malaysia? Is Malaysia fitting with my needs?
Absolutely. So first of all, I think one of the best ways is to attend a trade show. You get to see where the companies are being based at and what kind of products do they manufacture, and are the products that you're offering, are they competitive in the market, and where can you roughly position yourself? I think that's really important. And another aspect would be if the product is under the promoted sector by the government. So what the government do is, if it is under semiconductor, so these are like one of the promoted sectors, so which is probably a consideration. Maybe you should open up a plant here. You should consider opening up a plant.
Okay, that's great to know that you can follow the similar time of path. Usually we advise people to going to a trade show to understand, and after maybe deploying factory visits or getting to know a bit with a sourcing mission, getting to know the type of suppliers that are here, and after really engaging with the RFQ aspect and just getting to know if considering the raw materials, considering the cost of labor, considering the level of automation as well. That's something that we have seen. Some factories can still be competitive, or for some specific markets like Europe and the US, sometimes factory here, they are just positioned on, I would call their blue ocean, right? They don't need to compete with China always, but they can provide different type of services. It can be R&D, it can be also very high mix of item, low MOQ. This is also something that I've seen here that could bring them a competitive advantage to aim to expand to markets such as the US and Europe. So regarding actually to export to foreign markets, we didn't touch the point of free trade agreements, and I know Malaysia have some specific ones for US, for instance, for Europe, or for other parts in Asia. Can you mention some of them?
Absolutely. So we have some companies who enter Malaysian market considering trade agreements like the RCEP, CPTPP, and also the new free trade agreement with the European Free Trade Agreement, which includes the Switzerland, Norway, Ireland, and Liechtenstein. So companies who are also probably considering to maybe export or import certain products from Australia, from Japan, United Kingdom. So these are some things where companies need to look into and see how they can expand themselves.
Thank you, Darshini. And I really think that looking at Malaysia and Vietnam as a bundle, because they may both have different strengths and weaknesses, could really transcend a certain supply chain from a company, again, that is looking to move outside of China. By considering those two markets, they can really rely on countries that have, again, both strengths and weaknesses and complete each other very well. Thank you, Darshini, for your insights today. I will leave below in the description more details about our services. So in case you want to learn more about Vietnam, Malaysia, or other markets in the region, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.